welcome to another episode of Revenge MoGraph, where we break down popular trends in motion graphics. And today we're going to take a look at reverse engineering the title sequence from The Terror. I'll leave a link in the description below. So here's what we're going to do. Okay, just a little bit of face disintegration and some face melting, fun stuff like that. So let's get started here. I'm going to start with a new composition. We'll keep it pretty simple, 1280-720, nothing too high res. And let's just go ahead and grab the face first. So this is a face that I found on, I think it was Adobe stock, and make sure that the face you're using is something that has transparencies in the background, so you might have to do some Photoshop work there. So let's start by making this smaller and just centering it up on the nose here, so about halfway. Just a nice sort of symmetry there. Maybe I'll make it smaller still and kind of put that there. And so something like this perhaps. And now I'm gonna basically get started. Let me turn off the proportional grid. So the first thing we're gonna do is a lot of this is gonna be just an exercise in displacement mapping. So I'll go along here and explain as I make various properties changes to the displacement map effect. So first thing I'll do is I'm going to make a new solid here, and what I'm basically doing is doesn't matter what color really, but what I'm basically doing here is I'm going to generate a source for the map displacement, displacement map rather, and I'll do that by putting a fractal noise effect onto the solid here. So something like this. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. And we'll change it to dynamic, inverted perhaps, crank up the contrast. Okay, so something like that perhaps. And what I'm going to do immediately is pre-compose this. Okay, so layer, pre-compose. Let's call this displacement map. Or actually, let's call this something more descriptive, like source for displacement map, perhaps. Okay, and hit OK. So I like to work with two views. I like to work with having my main composition here on the right, and then the left side, whatever I'm doing to a pre-comp. So what I'll do is I'll lock down the main composition here and double-click the pre-comp and make two side-by-side comp views here. Okay, so on the left is basically the source for the displacement map, on the right is the face melt composition FMO3. Okay, now the way displacement mapping works is it basically generates a displacement based on black and white values. Now it's not what you think in terms of black being no displacement and white being full displacement. Actually, black and white are the two different directions. So if I have a horizontal displacement, the black values will go right or left, I believe, actually, and then the white values will go right. So actually, I don't want it to do that. Instead, I'm going to have to do a gray image, which is 50% black, and that way it's going to basically make the gray values neutral. So let's do that. I'll explain this a little bit better here in a minute. So actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a new solid here, and I'll make it black. Okay, so let's make it 100% black here. And I'll put this below. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'm going to apply another effect onto my fractal noise. This time I'm going to apply something called linear wipe. And what this is going to do is going to limit the amount of fractal noise to one side. So I'm going to crank up my transition completion to 50%, feather this like so. Okay, now again, as I mentioned earlier, black doesn't mean neutral. It means that the pixels will be displaced in a direction. So actually what I really need to do is make a new adjustment layer. Okay, and on top of this, I'm going to put a tint effect. Okay, and the reason why I'm doing this is because actually what I want to do is make all my black values neutral gray, and that way there'll be no effect by the displacement map effect. So I'll grab my map black 2, and here in the black level here, or the brightness, I'm going to change this to 50, and that way whatever is close to black, or actually is black, is going to change to a 50% gray. Now the reason again is because I want to have, let me go back into my original composition here, I want to have half of the face only affected. So if I do in fact now bring in a new adjustment layer, and I will put the displacement map onto my adjustment layer, what I want to do is here in the displacement map layer, source for DM. Okay, let's turn off the actual source for DM, and I'm going to zero out my vertical because I don't want any vertical displacement. So what's going to happen is if I drag left, I only get half the face distorted. Okay, and that's the reason why I made this particular displacement map half gray here and half fractal noise on the right. Okay, so that's what that is doing. So what I'm going to do simply is go to my 0 point. Let's zero this out at 0, and then go all the way to the 10-second mark, and let's maybe put in a large value like minus 1500, see what we get. So let's go ahead and take a look. So this is kind of doing what I want. It's melting only half the face away, disintegrating half the face. Okay. One thing I will do, I'm going to go back into my fractal noise here, and what I'll do here is click on the, I'm going to option click on the evolution here, and I'm going to put in the expression window time times 100 to generate basically a constantly evolving fractal noise. This would add just a little bit more dynamic to the melting face here. So I get something that looks like this as I render it out in preview here. Okay, so again, I'm trying to keep half the face sort of normal, the other half kind of disintegrating. Although I'm not really doing a good job here because it's getting sort of a lot of the left side as well as getting distorted. And I will fix this in a minute here, but I just want to show you the starting point. Okay, so before I fix that, I will go back again into my fractal noise map here, and I'm going to add one more thing to this, and that is I'm going to add a video that I found on YouTube, and this is just a video that I found on a YouTube search. So what I'll do is I'm going to basically use this as a way to sort of contain the fractal noise here. So first thing I will do is I'll rotate this 90 degrees, kind of like this. And again, I'm going to try to put this about halfway through. And I will also, I'm going to take my video starting point so it's a little bit more involved smoke-wise. And I'll do a little bit of non-uniform scaling like this. And what's basically happening when I turn this into a stencil luma is going to limit the smoke to basically kind of be, rather it's going to limit the fractal pattern to basically live inside the smoke as well. So if I play this back, it kind of looks like this. Okay, again, just sort of curtailing a bit of the fractal noise. Okay, now it is getting a hard edge here, so I'll go back into my layer here, and I will add a mask to the edge here like so, and I will do a little bit of feathering after I subtract rather than add that section, and feather that edge so it's not so visible rather. And now if I play back, I have something that kind of looks like this. And already, you know, the left side of the face is slightly more there. And I'm getting a little bit of a hard edge here, so I will go back here and maybe do a little bit more mask expansion, perhaps like that, just to minimize that edge. Okay, there we go. So you can sort of see a little bit of the face getting stripped away there. And as the preview keeps going forward, more and more of the face should begin to kind of strip away. Now, if for whatever reason there's not enough of face, I kind of want mine to be here down the middle, center of this. I can always go back into my original section here and move everything towards the left. Easiest way to do that is to create a new null and parent everything to that null. Okay, so I will actually, maybe I'll do everything except for the black layer here. So I'll do all of these guys. Okay, and then I can grab my position here and kind of move everything back to the left here. Okay, just feel free to experiment, obviously. And so now it's sort of going more into the face than it was before. All right, maybe something like this should work. Let's see what it looks like towards the end a little bit. And actually, I'll go in more, and I'll explain why a little bit, because I do want to have a pretty significant chunk of his face kind of missing here, as morbid as that sounds. Okay, maybe perhaps something like that. Okay, now again, the problem is that, you know, the other side of his face is also getting distorted. So what I will do at this point is I'll duplicate my main face here, put that all the way on top. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little bit of a track matte so that his face gets a little bit more. Obviously, if I just play this back, it's going to have the full face there. So what I'll do is I'll create a little bit of like a crack to the right side just to have that displacement map show through. So again, I'll do this with a new solid. And I'm going to do another fractal noise on there. Okay, this time around I'll do a slightly different. Maybe I'll just do a little bit of invert. Actually, it doesn't really matter. It just depends on what you get. And I'll crank up the contrast. And what I will do is at this point I will grab these two and I will layer pre-compose, and I'll just call this just face. And here, if I double click inside, I'm going to mess around with making that happen. So if I just do a luma of the gray solid here, which has the fractal, I get something like this, which affects the entire face. Okay, which is what I don't want. I just want the right side affected, and this is okay, you know. But the left side I want to have it nice and sort of left alone. So very simple thing you can do is click on this gray solid here with the fractal noise. And again, do another linear wipe. So let's try that. So let's put that on there. We'll kind of do it this way. And let's feather this a little bit. Okay, so only half of this is getting affected. So now what I can do to make this the other side is just simply click on the luma and go to luma inverted. Okay, and that way it should only affect that side. And here again, you can sort of mess around with some of these, you know, properties. If you want to make it go inside this face a little more, maybe decrease your feathering. If you want a more sharp edge, maybe something like that. And we can kind of keep playing around with this for an intended purpose later on. Okay, so this should be okay for right now. I might even go into my fractal noise here, and if I wanted to, I can make this a little bit more complex, just to give a little more variety. I can even crank up the contrast if I want to see more of this part kind of fade away. I can even mess around with evolution a little bit to get different options, maybe something like that perhaps. And let's also maybe move this to a little bit more inward. Okay, so perhaps something like this. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to go back into my main section here, and now pretty much the left side of this face here is left alone. Okay, now the right side is doing its job. It's kind of taken away and all that. So I'm going to put something underneath all of this that will sort of appear as his face is getting kind of ripped away, and that is just going to be just a simple skeleton I found. Again, another Google search. So what I'll do here is I'm going to grab all of these layers that are not the just face layer, precompose, and I call this main face disintegration. And below that, I'm just going to put a layer skull. Okay, so if I solo this, this is just something I found online. I'm going to make this smaller. Okay, and I'm just going to put this to the other side here and see what happens when some of this stuff gets stripped away, and I get this sort of interesting skull pattern here. Now obviously the skull, you know, it has its own background, so let's take care of that right now. So here what I can do is, you know, grab my pen tool, or grab my as a starting point, I'll grab the ellipse tool. Just double click on that. Let's go ahead and you know, bring this in a little bit on both sides and try to kind of limit the scope of that background. And I'm just going to put it on none temporarily so I can sort of reshape my mask here. Grab some, grab the pen tool, move some points around, try to get a little bit of that curvature of the skull here. You know, I'm not going to get too detailed with this, but just wanted to limit its background a little more. And actually, I don't even need the left side of this. I can bring these in a little more if I want, because it's not going to be visible anyway. Okay, so perhaps something like that. Okay, and I will now go ahead and turn on the mask back to add, and that way, as I said before, let me kind of zoom in on this. You can sort of see it as I play this back, reveal the skull underneath here. Okay. Now, if I want to get a little more of that, so for example, let's say I want more of the skull to sort of be visible. Again, this is just a matter of going into the layer, in this case, that contains the fractal pattern here, and just kind of playing around with this. So if you wanted to, for example, change the fractal pattern, or if you wanted to do something that makes the skull a little bit more pronounced, what I can do is let's just play around with that a little bit. I'll move this again to the left, and you know, that way I get slightly different variations. That seems kind of cool to me. Kind of want to see a little more of his teeth though, the skeleton's teeth. So maybe what I'll do is I'll increase the contrast here perhaps, and I could even take my smoke layer here and maybe move that shorter a little bit. Okay, maybe something like that. Just want to see a little bit more of the skull here, some teeth and all that. I can also try to get some more darker areas in here to reveal the skeleton as well. So here, for example, I could come in here, mess around my evolution a little bit, maybe at some point I can get it going into that area a little more, perhaps something like that. There, now you can see definitely those skeleton teeth. So again, this is just a matter of playing around with some of these values. You know, you can crank up the contrast as well and get the desired effect. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to save this. Let's go ahead and start adding some more particles in here. So again, what I will do is grab a new solid here, hit OK, and on top of this I will apply CC particle world, and as a starting point we have something like this. So I'm going to play around with some of these values, because what I'm trying to do is generate a directional particle set here. So I'll change this to direction axis, and immediately if I play this back, things are going way too fast. By the way, I'm soloing just that layer here. And so let's mess around with this. So for example, I'm going to crank up my radius Y, and let's turn down our velocity to something really slow, like 0.01 perhaps. So 0.01 should work, and I'll change both my birth color and death color to white, so they're both sort of the same here. And again, I get something like this, which is not what I want. So let's turn down the gravity. Instead of lines, let's change this into a shaded sphere. Now it does look kind of strange like this, but it will make sense once in the actual layout and the composition. So I do want these guys to travel, because they're really right now just the longevity is too short. Let's make this maybe 15, not 158, but 15. And we will do a little bit of let's turn down a birth rate to about 1. Okay, so it kind of looks like this. Maybe the velocity is a little bit too slow. Let's try 0.1 instead. Okay, not bad. Maybe let's do a 0.05. A couple of values here. And I do want it to start, you know, kind of going from nothing into an actual full visibility here. So, but I don't want it to be this constant. So I'll change a couple of things. The birth size might be a little bit too big. I'll change that to 0.2. Depth size, let's try 0. And let's see what it looks like. Now again, these are probably a little bit too large, so I'll do maybe a 0.1 for birth size. There we go. Now these kind of look like particles rather than actual spheres. Okay, so what I will do is maybe change my max opacity to 100%, so I am getting a good set here. Okay, now in order for this to work with our displacement map, it's the same basic principle as we did before, and that is we're going to make sort of this map for the displacement and allow that to work with our existing face disintegration as well. So what I will do here is layer precompose, and let's call this particles. I think that's misspelled. And again, I'm going to double click, unsolo this, I'll double click in here. Again, I like to work with two views like this. And I will also do the same thing. I'll do a new solid, and first thing we'll do is make it black. And what I'm going to do basically, as I did before, I'm going to add a new adjustment layer. Let me unsolo these. Bring this on top, and I will do another tint. So tint effect, and again I'll make all my black values go to 50%. So now we have something like this, just another pattern here. Okay, now so that it also kind of works with the other effect, I'm going to add the same video of the smoke. smoke video, and I'll do the same thing. I'll rotate it 90 degrees, and I'll go ahead and make it the same starting point, so it's a little bit more sort of involved here rather than just at the beginning. And again, I will do stencil Luma. Okay, so pretty much something like this. Now I know that it's getting rid of our gray here, but the stencil Luma is going to basically create a transparency. So it kind of works the same way as the gray. Okay, so that's something maybe I didn't necessarily have to have done. And so now I have something that looks like this. So if I just play this back, it's just particles kind of traveling inside that smoke section. Okay, and again, I'll do another mask just so that the hard edge isn't quite so hard. I'll do a subtract and then feather that. And so let me bring this a little bit more in. So it's not such a hard edge here. And that should be okay. So let's see what we get. And now we just have particles. Now obviously we need to do the same sort of thing, and that is new adjustment layer. The same effect, displacement map. Okay, and again, we'll do the same basic thing here on the source. We'll do particles, and let's just uncheck the actual visibility of the particles themselves, and we'll put both of these guys below the just face layer. Okay, so if I play this back, I should see some particles after I mess with some of these values. So let's, as we did before, make the 0 for the vertical, negative values on the horizontal displays here. So let's see what we get here. So now that we play this back, we've got some particles kind of shooting out, playing along with the face disintegration here as well. Okay, now these particles, they kind of stop here, and I can also do a little bit of animation here. So for example, maybe at frame 0, I'll make this 0, and then again, as I did before with the other displacement map, I'll crank this up to maybe minus 1500 as well, just so they kind of leave that area. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We've got a nice little skull reveal there. And this is kind of what I was going for, you know. Maybe a little bit too much of the teeth here, but I think I'm okay with that. We got a little bit of the eye socket reveal and all that, so that looks pretty good. Okay, so just to kind of round this out, I'm going to grab another adjustment layer. Let's apply a tint effect to the adjustment layer. I'm going to tint this whole thing so it kind of looks more uniform. Let's go ahead and map the white values to something like a kind of a orangey, dark orangey color. Maybe something like that. And to play this back, I'm going to go ahead and switch to one view. There we go. Get a nice reveal there. Okay, and a couple other things we'll do just to finish this out. Let's make a new solid here. We'll make it, yeah, let's make it black. And I'm going to put this all the way below. Maybe I'll do a little bit of a gradient ramp on that. And I will change a couple things. I'll do something a little bit more subtle. I just want to give the background just a little bit more depth. So maybe I'll do something like so here, a radial map, and I'll set two of my colors here. Maybe I'll reverse these two. Let's zoom out here a little bit. So I'm just going to do a slight linear, or rather radial gradient here, and just give it a little bit more depth back there, perhaps like that. And just to top things off, I will do one more thing, and that is layer new solid again. And this time I'll just use this as another particle layer just for particles. So I'll do another CC particle world right in there. Keep things nice and simple. I'm just going to solo this, and again I'll do very simple things with this, somewhat based on the particles I use for the actual face melt and all that. So I'll do another directional axis. At this point I will crank up my Y radius. I'll move everything off to this side. Maybe I'll crank this up a little more. Change this to actually, I accidentally moved the layer. What I really should have done is just move the emitter here. So I should have actually just done something like this. And let's go ahead and crank up the X radius. I'll change this to shaded sphere. Again, we'll do very subtle, simple things here with the particles, and I'll do basically almost no velocity. Get rid of the gravity. Change the birth and death size to 0.1, maybe 0. Really keep these things controlled here. Longevity I'll crank up, let's say 20. And let's see what we get here. Maybe this is even a little bit too much. Let's change the birth rate to 1 or even 0.5. And what I can do here is, on the gray, I'll just move this all the way to the left like this. So, you know, we'll have the particles pretty much already in our shot here. Maybe I'll increase the, let's just increase the radius of the X here. And let's see what we get. Okay, a little bit too many particles, so I will decrease that maybe to 0.1. All right, maybe something like that, and then I'll change, let's unsolo this, and now we've got just a little more of these particles kind of floating around. And like I said before, you know, feel free to mess around with some of these values, you know, whatever you kind of want it to do. Okay, one final thing, and that is I'm just going to add another null to everything. And what I'm simply going to do is grab a lot of these layers, except maybe I'll keep the gray and the black here by themselves. Maybe these, I'll parent all of these to my null, because I kind of want to move these things around. And I'll just do a very subtle scale in. So frame 0, let's go all the way towards the end. Let's bring this closer to camera. Let's just ease these. And let me do a full screen here. And now if I render this out, I get a slightly more moving effect here, I would say. Now, one other thing, I know I keep saying that, but let's just add another adjustment layer. Let's put in a curves adjustment onto this, color correction curves. And what I'll do is just increase my contrast a little bit. You know, up to you guys, something like that. Okay, so this is the final effect I'm going for, just a kind of a final reveal of the skull here. Let me turn down my particles in the background a little bit. And again, this is not exactly like the title sequence, but this is sort of my version of it without using any extra plugins like Particular or anything like that. Just a complete sort of After Effects version of this. All right, thanks for joining me. Subscribe, like, and all that stuff if you like, and I'll make more. I appreciate you guys watching.